Welcome everyone. I was requested to do a layout tour by someone on YouTube, and there's a bunch of folks on YouTube who I've benefited from over the last year or so of working on my layout, getting back into the hobby after about 3 decades. And so I owe a great deal to the people who take the time to post their information on YouTube, so I'd be happy to accommodate by putting a brief video together to show what I have going on. So I'm modeling the Chessie system in western Pennsylvania in 1974. It's the former Buffalo, Rochester, and Pittsburgh branch, and it's a point-to-point layout. Staging yards representing, Butler, Pennsylvania, and points south like Pittsburgh, and then ultimately, while still under construction, there'll be a staging yard at the north end representing East Salamanca, New York, and then trains from there would obviously go to either Buffalo or Rochester. So I should also point out I'm modeling in a row home that was built in the late 1800s and has the whole lot is 20 feet wide. The tail of the house where the dining room is where I am in the basement. So from foundation wall to wall, I'm about 9 feet. So I'm working in an area that's very long and narrow. As a result, I've got a very linear layout that's just kind of stacked on top of itself in a shelf configuration, just 2 tiers with a 4-turn helix in between. I would have loved to avoid having a helix, but we all know the drill. We get greedy for railroad, and the only way to do that is to sometimes go vertical. So here we are in the southern staging yard, and this represents Butler, Pennsylvania, in which at the time, in 1974, Chessie system had a yard as well as the Penn Central. I would have loved to have been able to model those yards and the scenic portion and actually show interchange traffic by doing yard-to-yard runs. Simply don't have the space to do that. So I should also point out that I'm working in an area where the staging yards are. I've got a bunch of ducts here, so this is a kind of a low area. I'm crouched over to even take this shot. I can fully access the staging yards, but certainly not a comfortable position to operate trains. So that's why I put the staging here. The scenic portion of the layout, normal people can stand up at least. So, so here we are on the 6 tracks, one of which is actually the yard lead for the Penn Central yard, and I'll show you that in a minute. So we got 6 tracks. Of course, we always have the problem of not having big enough staging, so I may end up adding couple feet here to these tracks, because as I'm doing my design for the upper staging area, which will ultimately go above this, I can get probably longer trains up there, so I want to have at least roughly equivalent lengths on both yards. So, but you can see here I've got the Penn Central has three tracks, and then Chessie's got the 5. They both actually come out parallel to one another. This is the Chessie system main, this is the Penn Central, and while they kind of enter the scenic portion close to one another, you'll see on the other side I did my best to try and make it appear, the illusion that they're actually going to different locations. So this is all kind of a trailing point, a facing point situation, and you'll see how that works for Penn Central. Again, Penn Central is really just kind of has a cameo appearance here to try and just generate some additional traffic and interest. Give you a little bit of a longer shot down the path. So. All right, so we'll work around now, and this goes 180 degrees, so basically doubles back on itself paralleling the staging. So coming around following the Chessie system main, and we come to the diamond at the interchange between Penn Central and Chessie, which did not exist as far as I can tell. As I told you, both railroads had yards. I just couldn't figure out a way to model that in the space I had, so I just have an interchange track. I threw a diamond in there, both because the geometry worked better, but also kind of gives the appearance and idea that you've got 2 railroads interchanging or intersecting one another. So just basically a interchange track here. I've also done my best to try and research a little bit. I live in eastern Pennsylvania, so I don't get out to the western side of the state too often. I've been out just once so far, taking some photographs of some things, but did some online research and tried to model to the best of my ability some of the industries, or again represent some of the industries that are in Butler, Pennsylvania, or were in Butler in 1974. So this is a reasonable representation, I think, of the Carter Lumber Company, which I think was there in '74. It's still there now, but going back, doing some research, I think they may have moved locations, so I'm not 100% sure. But the next building, these are not, by the way, in any kind of proper geographic order. Huge amounts of selective compression and modeler's license. But this next building, which is still in just kind of raw masonite form that I'm scratch building, will ultimately be the Pullman Standard Car Company. And anyone who's familiar with that location when it stood, there were just dozens and dozens of tracks going into that facility. Again, don't have the capacity to model that on this little narrow shelf layout, but tried to make the scale and feel of it apparent as part of the model. So that then comes down around the corner. Another industry still represented by cardboard is the PPC lubricants. And again, just another 180-degree turn going back the other direction. And as I mentioned, wild amounts of selective compression. Here we are at the Allegheny River already. So that's still being scenic, and there's some modeling going on there as well. So coming across the Allegheny River, again, we skip over miles and miles and miles and come into the town of Valier, Pennsylvania. And again, existing today, there's the Valier coal yard. I don't know when that was there or how long. Looks like it's been there a while. And it certainly is plausible that a lot of the small coal mines in western Pennsylvania in the 70s did not warrant running rail to, so there were coal yards here and there where they could truck their coal, weigh it on scales, and then load it onto hopper cars. So that's what I've done here. I've also added a completely fictitious industry. Maybe it's an agway or some type of farm supply with, you know, propane and cars with seed and farm implement parts, things of that nature. So again, coming along this way, just one grade crossing, scenery still in progress, and we turn into and go underneath the bottom of the helix. So that's the complete first layer of the lower level of the railroad, and you can see a 4-turn helix, about 2.33% grade. I'll kind of take a step sideways. So we'd be coming up the helix like this, and then entering the town of Punxsutawney, highly compressed engine service facility. And behind that is a plant that I'm positive, well, still standing there, and I took some good photographs of it, is the Airco Spear plant. They made carbon and graphite castings and electrodes and things of that nature. Definitely was opened in '74. And the car sitting on this backtrack, that represents the Indiana branch, which is completely on the wrong end of Riker Yard in Punxsutawney, but again, we fit in what we can. And so coming into Riker, I tried to make it a functional yard. Again, I mentioned I enjoy switching. So here we've got off the main here, we've got an arrival departure track, another arrival departure track, and then the main all the way in the back. So I should note, coming up from coming up from Pittsburgh to Punxsutawney, it's all single track main. Going north out of Riker back in '74, I think it was still 2 tracks at that point in time. It's now only down to 1. You'll note that I just really couldn't make this shelf any wider without really obstructing the view of the scenery below, without kind of crouching down. All kinds of height and space limitations. So we're really just going to end up, once I put ballast and some minor scenery, this is really going to be it. I don't have any space for much else because, as I mentioned, the whole point is to run trains. I'm trying to create the scenery as part of the illusion, but just don't have space to do nearly what I'd like to. So, and a caboose track here as well. And what I've done is actually kind of cheat and use the second main as the switch lead for Riker Yard. So the main is in the back here, and so I can run unobstructed through trains while switching operations are occurring. So here's switcher has some cars pulled partway up the grade, so it comes up a hill a little bit here into Du Bois, Pennsylvania, coming over Limestone Run. And before we get into Du Bois, there is a turnout of the yet to be completed Clearfield branch, and that'll kind of just dive right back into the upper staging yard, kind of similar in fashion to the Penn Central situation on the lower level, where you just have a short run, but it just gives you another destination to run trains to reasonable geographic points. So this is the double track main up here in Du Bois. There's going to be a couple industries as well, but right now this is the end of my layout, so this is kind of doubling or standing in as East Salamanca, New York, where anything north is situated here. So obviously the backdrop not installed here. You can kind of see the ductwork and my lights for the staging yard on the back side of this framing. So while I won't walk you through the whole basement, the upper deck will actually go past. You can see here's the loop where we came out of staging out of Pittsburgh, came right through. we're actually going to, on the second level, I'm going to go straight across deeper into a different part of the basement here with just one deck, allowing me to do some additional modeling of Du Bois and Falls Creek. And it'll probably loop underneath some more ducts, again, kind of in a staging area, non-scenic rather, come down a slight grade, and then basically right in on top of Pittsburgh will be the East Salamanca staging yard. You can see I've got the cleat already installed for the upper level. And I actually had to lower this a few inches from the Du Bois area just because I don't think you'd be able to reach in. So I think it's going to be fully accessible, so I can really kind of build trains back here. But again, you wouldn't want to spend a lot of time back here because it's somewhat uncomfortable. So, and this will ultimately get wrapped around and create the transition out to that spot I mentioned, C&M Junction, where the Clearfield branch comes off. So just based upon where the yard throat will start on the upper level, even if I stop East Salamanca here, it'll hold trains about 2 or 3 feet longer than Pittsburgh will hold. So I think I'll move, or rather Butler will hold. So I think I'll move or extend some of these tracks eventually. So that's what I've got so far. I hope to post some additional things as I make progress, but that's the Chessie System Pennsylvania division and what the Br&p hopefully looked like or operated similarly at some capacity in 1974. So hope you enjoyed it and stay tuned for more. Thanks.